The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 100?
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
That's right. We are officially at episode 100. Welcome back to the EL Faithful, and welcome to you if this is your first time listening in. So after much thought and counsel from top names in the podcasting world, we're adding a brand new element to this podcast. I'm excited to announce that we will now be giving a book per episode away. That's 5 books a week. One of the funnest things for a book enthusiast to do is build their personal library. Whether you still buy books from the store or you're getting them online, there is that excitement when you open that brand new book for the first time. So, starting today, we will be selecting a winner. Here's how easy it is to win. Just visit the elpodcast.com and click on Become a VIP. It's up in the right-hand corner. Not only do you have a chance to win books daily, but you will also get our free guide, the top 10 books recommended by over 500 successful entrepreneurs. Once you are a VIP, you are in the daily drawing for the book we cover in that day's episode. Now, to start this new chapter for the Entrepreneur's Library, we have decided to start with a bang. Today, we have one of the most successful authors in the entrepreneurial space. Chris Guillebeau is a New York Times bestselling author. He has written $100 Startup, The Art of Nonconformity, and his newest book, The Happiness of Pursuit. So I just said we were going to start off with a bang. So we've decided to give all 3 of Chris's books away today. Again, all you have to do is visit the elpodcast.com and click Become a VIP. So without further ado, let's jump into our interview with Chris Guillebeau, author of The Happiness of Pursuit, Finding the Quest That Will Bring Purpose to Your Life. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Hey, Wade, thanks so much for having me.
Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Yep, just a moment. I'm a writer, traveler, entrepreneur. I've spent the past 10 and a half years on a personal quest of visiting every country in the world. And I wrote a few other books. I wrote The $100 Startup. I wrote The Art of Nonconformity. And I'm fortunate to connect with just a great global community of awesome people doing awesome stuff all over.
Perfect. So, Chris, I didn't tell you this offline, but today is our 100th episode here at the Entrepreneur's Library. And because it's our 100th episode, we wanted to do something awesome. We're actually giving away all 3 of your books to a lucky winner. So,
that's fun. That's great. Well, congratulations on the anniversary.
Thank you very much. And we thought, what a perfect. We wanted to have a really top, A-list author come on and be able to talk for the 100th episode. So we have you on to talk today, and then we also, in lieu of that, are able to give away all 3 of your books. So we're excited about that. But
cool.
To get back on topic, I guess. Thank you for sharing that about your as far as personal stuff. And now let's jump right into the book that we came to talk about today, The Happiness of Pursuit, which was just made available for purchase in September 2014. And Chris, we're going to move quickly, but we're really here to cover the top questions that our listener/reader wants to get answered. And their first question is, what was the inspiration behind writing The Happiness of Pursuit?
So this is probably my most personal book yet. It took me a little bit longer to write than the other 2. I had, as I mentioned, I kind of came to the end of this 10 and a half year journey of going to every country in the world. So that was 193 countries, like no exceptions, every single country. And as you might imagine, that was just an incredible experience, for me personally. And so when it came time to write about it, I didn't want to just write a travel memoir. I didn't want it to just be like, oh, here's Chris's stories of traveling or whatever. I wanted to look at something more deeper. And so the model that we used for $100 Startup was essentially a case study model of looking at all kinds of different people who had started a business without going into debt, without going to business school. And I really liked that model because we pulled out all these different examples and showed how people had done it very specifically. And so it wasn't just like my experience, it was all kinds of other people. So I used the same model for the new book, The Happiness of Pursuit. I looked at all kinds of different people who had undertaken a quest or had pursued a really big adventure. And I wanted to understand why they did it, what happened along the way, what they sacrificed or traded off in order to do it, what was the greatest thing, what was the hardest thing, and then just kind of extrapolate those lessons. And then the goal, was not just to provide a bunch of stories, just like it wasn't to just be a travel memoir. the goal was to present this agenda to the reader. And the agenda is that adventure is good for us and we should do hard things. And so I tried to do that in different ways, throughout the book, through all the stories, through the lessons, through the stuff about me. But ultimately, the focus is on the reader and on why adventure can be a good value for our lives.
So, Chris, the entrepreneur today is inundated with tons of books. Michael Hyatt was actually talking at a conference here recently about how like 1.5 million books came out in 2013 alone. And so his next question is really to help us, find that needle in that haystack as far as that next great read. And that's what makes your book different from others regarding the same topic.
Yeah, well, 1.5 million is quite a lot of competition. This is interesting. So here's my opportunity to be a salesman for the book. I guess I would say that this is quite a different book because it's I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and a lot of people in the book are entrepreneurs. But I would say it's actually not primarily an entrepreneurial quote unquote book. It's something that's much more about creating meaning and purpose in our lives. And we can do that in different ways. And lots of people find meaning and purpose, through creating ventures, that serve the world, that contribute to something meaningful and then also make money. But I guess I was trying to go beyond that. And, in the $100 startup, that's, totally 100% entrepreneurial book. This is much more about, I started a business, but why did I start a business? And part of why I started a business was because I valued freedom. I really valued independence. And I was a terrible employee. Like I didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted to work for myself. And I valued that freedom because it allowed me to do other things. It allowed me to travel. It allowed me to volunteer in West Africa for several years. All the different things that I cared about. So I wanted to look and see like how a quest can improve our lives. So like whether we are entrepreneurs or not, here's how we can bring these values, into our life. And maybe it'll improve our business as well. But regardless of whether it improves our business, like hopefully there's something about this that can improve our lives.
And how would you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this one they can jump in and jump out as they need different information? Or is this really one you designed to be read from front to back?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never want to tell people how to read or how to engage or how to consume with something that I've created. If I've made something, like our attention span is quite limited. There are like so many opportunities to read something or do something, as you said. So far be it from me to say like, the reader should do this or the reader should do that. But at the same time, I guess as an author, like writing a book is different from writing a blog post or creating some kind of online content. If you write a good book, there really should be an arc to it. There really should be some narrative that you begin in one place and then you're going to the next chapter for a certain reason, and eventually you're going to tie it all together. So I would say it's probably easier to start in the beginning and keep going. But I'm also a nonconformist, so I don't want to tell people how to read.
That's a great answer. All right, Chris, we're to my absolute favorite part of the entire interview. As a book lover, I'm always looking for that next great book, and it's become tough because I'm looking on Amazon and I'm looking on Google, and it's the whole reason why we started the podcast was to help out. What better than to get a review, a deep dive from the author themselves? And so that's what I'm going to ask you to do now is really, I'm going to hand over the mic. I'm not going to interrupt you at all, and allow you to take the next 5 to 10 minutes and really lay out what the book's all about. Will you do that for us?
Yeah, I'll do what I can. No pressure here on the 100th episode, right?
Exactly.
So no, this is such a great program. I love your format. I think this is just a great way to do it. So, what I tried to do, with this book, what I hope to do in the beginning is really kind of capture the reader's attention. And even though the book is not fundamentally a book about, the life of Chris Guillebeau, I did kind of begin with this story of going to my penultimate country, which was Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. And to get there, it was the usual challenge. Like I'd been through this challenge many different times, but it never really got old because there's always this whole challenge of getting the visa and then like arranging all the complicated flights. And I fly to Dakar, Senegal, and I spend the night like sleeping on the floor of the airport or essentially in like a plastic chair. And so I'm going through all this hardship essentially. And I wake up in the morning, like having slept, 3 hours or whatever. And I'm kind of like, why am I doing this? Like what is the point? Like I have a successful career. I am an entrepreneur. I've got plenty of projects I could work on. Why am I flying all over the world to this random country? I'm like, oh yeah, it's because I've chosen to value this quest and I'm almost at the end and I've worked, for it. And once I had this crazy idea of going to every country in the world, it was totally a crazy idea. It was totally absurd and ridiculous, but I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I would always regret it if I didn't at least try. So that was the value. That's why I had to do it. So I kind of like begin with this opening, and then I talk about how, the greatest thing that happened along the way, had nothing to do with me, but it really was like all these other great people that I met, throughout the journey, people that taught me things, people who are also kind of pursuing their quest. And at a certain point, I decided to get more strategic about putting out a call for people and saying, like, if you pursued a great quest, in your life, or if you're in the middle of one, like, I want to know, why you did that. I want to hear from you. And so, I began sharing a little bit about some of those stories. And I talk about this guy who took on the 4-year MIT computer science curriculum, which is supposed to be like one of the most difficult, computer science curriculums. And he did it in 1 year. I talk about why he did that, like what he learned through that process. I talk about this guy who walked across America, and he had the same kind of crazy idea. He's like, I should walk across the United States. And like, why would we, like, how does that work? Like, how much time does that take? Has anybody done that? But it wouldn't leave him alone, And I talk about this guy who produced the world's largest symphony. And this symphony, took place in Brisbane, Australia, and it hadn't been performed anywhere in the world for more than 30 years because it was so difficult. It required 800 performers, lots of specialized instruments, and multiple choirs. But he really just kind of loved this music. He really wanted to bring it, to his hometown. So he spent, 28 years himself, like, failing and starting over and trying to recruit a team and all this kind of stuff before he finally succeeded. So I kind of give some previews of these stories, and throughout the book, there's 50 stories, like this that are coming. So these are just kind of a few highlights and just kind of trying to draw the reader in. And so I organized the book around 3 sections. The first section is beginnings. So it's talking a little bit about my journey and about how people come to a quest, why they choose to engage with this extended project, something that is going to take a long time. It's going to be difficult. In fact, it's difficult by design. It's a challenge by design. It shouldn't be easy. If your quest is to like get up in the morning and walk down the street to Starbucks and get your coffee and go back, like that's great. That's not a quest. Like the quest should involve challenge. It should involve like, difficulty and the possibility of failure. So I talk a little bit about how a lot of people are discontented. And that's how they come to their quest or their project. They are a little bit unhappy. Maybe they're unsettled. Maybe they're not miserable, but they just kind of have this yearning for something more. And they want to do something special with their lives. And they use a lot of common language. I noticed that people who are pursuing quests, even if they're like different walks of life, men and women, young people, older people, people from different countries, they often talk about having these crazy ideas. They talk about being discontented. They have what I called an emotional awareness of mortality. A lot of them are really focused on living with urgency and doing something that matters. So I know entrepreneurs can connect with that value as well. So then the bigger section of the book, the second section is just called Journey. And it has a lot more of these stories, and it's looking at the values, that these people have. And it's meant to be prescriptive. It's not meant to be just like, here's so-and-so, here's the story of the guy who walked across America. It's like, here's his story and here's what we can learn from it. Here's how we can apply it in our lives. And then, as an author, I'm trying to always think about objections. Entrepreneurs should also relate to this. Like whenever you're like writing your sales copy, you should think about like what people are not going to like or what their objection is going to be. And so one of the objections that I tried to be cognizant of like throughout the writing of the book was that people are going to hear some of these stories. They're going to say, well, that's incredible, but like I could never do that. So there was a guy who ran 250 marathons in a single year. And I thought, like, what an amazing story, but also like no one's going to read this book and say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to run a marathon, and then the next day, and then the next day, like nobody's going to run 250 marathons in a year after reading that story. So I tried as much as possible to focus on what I called everyday adventure, or showing how people could cultivate the value of adventure in their own lives, even if they're not ready to do that crazy thing. There was another guy who took a 17-year vow of silence. So again, like incredible story, like he learned, so much through that process, and we can learn from him, but most people aren't ready to do that. So my favorite story in that regard is the story of Sasha Martin. And Sasha is a young mother from Oklahoma. And, she just had her daughter, and she had actually grown up in Europe. And so she was thinking, like, I want to raise my daughter with an international perspective. Like, I want my daughter to know more about the world than just what's, here in her home state, but I can't take her all over the world. So she decided to cook a meal from every country in the world. And she made this her quest. And it was every country, no exceptions, no modifications. She took on the same 193 country list that I did for visiting the countries. And every week she would, research the recipes. And then she would cook the meal, and she would play music from that country. So she talked about how like over 3 years, like her daughter is growing up, like eating all these different foreign foods, and her daughter is like totally comfortable with chopsticks or with silverware or with her fingers, depending on what it is. And she talked about how that quest had transformed her family's life. So trying to highlight lots of stories like that, and then talking about how people do it and how much money it costs, how much time it takes, again, thinking about those objections, and just helping people strategically to craft a quest for their life and to craft an adventure for their life, no matter who they are, no matter what their situation is, trying to find a way to bring this concept from not just something that they read about to something that they actually do. And so the last section is called Destination, and that's about arrivals. And it's about, when I came to the end of my quest last year, like what was that like? And other people who like finish a quest, they've been training for this ultra marathon in the Sahara Desert, for example. And, they spend 6 months in this process, and they travel there and they spend 10 days or whatever, like running the race, and then they finish. And what does that look like? And is it this moment of jubilation? Is it more complicated than that? Like often it's kind of bittersweet. So how do people process that, and what do they do next, and how does this improve their lives? So I guess in all three sections, I'm essentially trying to give the reader tools for how they apply this in their own life, in their own pursuit, how this is relevant to them. And for me, as an author, like I said earlier, I don't want to tell people how to read my books or how to engage with them. But I will say that the compliment that I like the most, like what I hear, I'm especially excited to hear, is when someone says, I read your book and then I did something differently, or I thought about something differently, or I read the $100 Startup and like now I have my own small business, or I was able to tweak something and it was a direct result of this connection that we have. And that means so much more than saying like, oh, I read your book, like nice book. So I guess as an author, as a prescriptive author, my goal is always that people will go away from the book, whether it's Happiness of Pursuit or something else, and they're like, I read this book and then I did something about it. Like I want inspiration combined with action. That's always my goal. As to whether I'm successful or not, that's up to the reader to decide. But hopefully that's a decent summary of what I wanted to accomplish in The Happiness of Pursuit.
That was a phenomenal summary. And this next question, as a nonconformist, this next question might be tough for you to answer as well. And it's almost taking everything that you just said and breaking it down even further. And that's really just, if the reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of everything you just discussed with us in your entire book, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was just thinking, I think maybe I might have covered it already, so I'll just kind of restate, if you're trying to figure out like what's my thing, like what is it? I have all this fear and insecurity. Like I certainly had anxiety and all kinds of stuff in preparing to go to every country in the world and then sharing things about it publicly. But I really did focus on this question of regret. I did realize like if I don't do this, I'm really going to regret it. And something might go wrong along the way. I might fail, but I could deal with that because that failure would be from something external. I don't want to fail from something internal. So if I have this idea, like I have to pursue it. And that's what I would say to them, that if they're in that place, they're not alone. Like there is something greater out there. There is an adventure. There's a calling. There's something for all of us. And the more that we take steps toward it, the easier it becomes. So don't stop. Don't ignore that calling.
So Chris, not that I'm asking you to share a specific regret, but was there a time in your life where you had a regret and that's now why it's impacted you in such a way that you want to make sure you don't have any going forward?
I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't do anything about it for a long time. I was doing other stuff, like I was an entrepreneur, that was great. But I had this yearning to write, and I just kept waiting or something. Like I don't know what I was waiting for. I was waiting for like the book fairy to descend and say like, here's how you write a book. And that's not how it works, And I finally started. As soon as I started writing online, like even before the books, I just loved everything about it. I loved the connection with readers. I love the idea of being able to put something out and just, anybody who wanted could stumble upon it. Maybe it would just be like 5 people and one of them is my grandma, but that's okay. Like, so I guess I wish I'd started earlier.
Great answer. And this next question might be a little bit odd, but it's really, do you have a favorite quote from your book? And this is really meant to be, I'm hoping, something you wrote. I'm trying to give the author maybe a chance to brag on themselves, which is hard for people to do. And if not, if you have a hard time pulling something that you personally wrote, maybe something that the audience, it's resonated with them, And so you've got their feedback. It might be that that they're tweeting a certain quote or something. But do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Yeah, so I'll actually give a quote that's actually from one of the stories that I wrote about in the book. So it's not my quote, though I've stolen it and used it since then. But there's this great guy named Stephen Kellogg, and he's an independent musician. He's released a bunch of albums. He's been on this world tour, and when he first got started, just like all of us, he had no audience, and like he would be playing these shows for like 4 people, and it didn't matter because he loved what he was. It was like, this is so great. Like I was just in my bedroom before, and now there's 4 people, and he didn't know if he was going to be successful or not. But I guess what he realized was like he was on the right track, and so he said something that kind of stuck with me. He said, it's better to be at the bottom of the ladder you want to climb than the top of one you don't. And before he pursued that career as an independent musician, he had various other jobs and things he did, and he was getting promoted, but he wasn't finding fulfillment in it. So it was like better to be like starting out, playing music for 4 people, doing something I love, than to be like making lots of advancement in something I don't care about. So I like that.
That's excellent. As crazy as the moderator of this interview, it's my least favorite question to ask about the quote because quotes make me think. And I'm supposed to keep going with the podcast and ask the next question. And I'm sitting here going, man, that's really powerful. So for those that are walking on the treadmill, on their way back from work, however you're listening to this right now, we will put that in the show notes so that if you want to revisit it, you can. Like I said, I love the question. But for me, when I hear a quote, I want to put it through my filter and kind of think about it, and I can't. So next question, and there's no doubt in my mind, and obviously when you look at the reviews on Amazon and on different places that your books are paradigm shifting books, and they impact people. And that's our last question is basically, what's a book that you've read that's had a huge impact on your life and maybe created some paradigm shifts? And will you share that with our audience?
Yeah, no, it's great. I'll give you 2, actually, if you don't mind.
No,
first one is called Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder. It's the story of Dr. Paul Farmer. And Dr. Paul Farmer essentially had a quest of his own to bring better health care to Haiti and other places in the world. And in many ways of doing that, he's essentially alone in doing so and encountering all these different challenges. And it's not an entrepreneurial book per se, but I think it's very applicable to anyone pursuing a challenge or wanting to make a greater difference in the world. And then the second one will be a book by an author named Barbara Sher. And Barbara has written a number of books, but my favorite of hers is called Wishcraft. So not witchcraft, but wishcraft, like WISH. And this was the book that started a lot of things like many, many years ago, helping people really think about what they want out of life and work. And there have been some other books that have come along since then that maybe have been more popular or something. But hers, I actually think, is the genesis of a lot of this kind of conversation and thinking. So if people are in that place where they're kind of defining their own work, whatever that is, or living differently, I think they should go back to where it started and read Wishcraft by Barbara Sher.
Excellent. Those are two new books that haven't been recommended in the previous 99 episodes. So I'm excited that you shared both of those.
Awesome.
So Chris, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our audience, for our listener, to get not only more information on you, but on your brand new book, The Happiness of Pursuit?
Well, the book should be available at any bookstore, or you can hassle them and ask them to order it, or Amazon, or however you prefer to read. And as for me, no one can ever spell my name, Chris Guillebeau, but it is chrisguillebeau.com. And if you can't find that, you can go to artofnonconformity.com, and that will send you over to my home.
Perfect. And for those that can't spell it, again, visit the show notes at the elpodcast.com, where we'll obviously have that written down so there's no guesswork on how to spell it. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on. This was one of my favorite interviews that I've done, and that's fitting because it was episode 100, and I have a little bit of extra excitement today. And so thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Oh, awesome. It's a big honor, and congratulations again. Here's to the next 100.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you would like to get more information on Chris or this most recent book, The Happiness of Pursuit, or even his other books, we'll have those in the show notes as well, visit the elpodcast.com. And like we stated in the beginning, if you want an opportunity to win all 3 books, click Become a VIP on the homepage. And not only will you have access or an opportunity to win those 3 books, but also a book for every episode that we launch here in the future. So again, our point, hopefully we can help you build your personal library and help you in your quest to grow personally and professionally.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.